Professor of Human Genetics at Sheba Medical Center and a graduate of Ben-Gurion University, which I have to say.
Well, good morning to everybody. Maybe I should give you some more background about PGD, and let me start with what I would call some breaking news. Out of the diseases that are mentioned here, at least for one disease, we already perform currently PGD, and that is Huntington disease. Whoever walks in and they have a Huntington in their family, if they want PGD, they can get it at our institute. Now, PGD is a technology which exists in our institute for about 5 years. It started very gradually, and today we perform about 180 cycles of PGD a year, okay, and for a couple of dozens of diseases, a couple of dozens of different diseases, autosomal recessive, X-linked, and autosomal dominant disease. Some are of very early onset, some of late onset. Now, what actually is done in PGD, we take an egg from a woman and we fertilize it outside her body. We let it grow in a small dish for about 48 hours. And when it reaches a stage of 6 or 8 cells, we take one cell out, only one cell out, and with the technologies shown earlier, mainly PCR, we look for the mutation that exists in that particular family. And if we find the mutation, then we do not return that specific embryo. If we don't find it, then we return the embryo. Now, PGD is not a very innocent technology. It imposes women who do it to certain risks. It is usually done, the taking out of the eggs is done under general anesthesia. It's done with an invasive technology that is laparoscopy. And so, and before that, women receive large amounts of estrogens in order to stimulate their ovaries. So it's not a benign technique. One must remember that when we have a couple with a genetic disease, there are a couple of other options which this couple can have. First, they can have children with the disease, especially if it's not a very severe disease. And we see couples with, for example, hemophilia, who willingly have children with hemophilia. The other option, which is not very common, is not to have children at all. But we also sometimes see that. Then they can adopt a child. They can get an egg donation, or they can get a sperm donation. And what is currently mostly done by couples with genetic diseases is they get pregnant, and at the right time they perform either CVS or amniocentesis, and the prenatal diagnosis is done. And if the embryo is affected, the fetus, if it is affected, then they just stop the pregnancy. Now, each time the woman goes a cycle like this, she has about 15% chance of ending this cycle with a healthy baby. That is 85% of the time, or 6 out of 7, it won't come to the birth of a child. In about 1/3 of the cases, they get pregnant, but the pregnancy doesn't hold. And in the others, they don't even get pregnant with this procedure. So it's a lengthy procedure. And then there's the issue of cost. Each cycle costs about 30,000 shekels, 30,000 Israeli shekels. Okay, so if a woman has to go 6 or 7 cycles, consider the price. Now in Israel, for genetic diseases, for severe genetic diseases, up to 2 children, it's covered by the health insurance. So that's not too big of a problem. And then there's the issue of sometimes this woman, the cost of raising up a child with a severe disease is much more than having even 10 or 20 cycles. For example, a child with hemophilia, it's a treatable disease, but to treat a child with hemophilia over his lifespan can cost something like $10 million. So it's much more, it's much cheaper to have this woman perform this procedure than to raise up a child with such a disease. And I'm not talking about the social and the psychological burdens of having a child with such diseases. Now, yes, we face the ethical problems almost on a daily basis. There are some diseases which, for example, take Huntington disease. Huntington disease usually expresses itself only at the age of 50, sometimes even 60. But I would say this is the curse of modern medicine. If someone at the age of 25 knows that he's a carrier of the gene for Huntington disease, then it would probably affect and, in a sense, ruin the rest of his life. The same goes many times for breast cancer. Okay, so today, when we know that we can diagnose these diseases, it's very hard for a couple to have a child, for example, that is a carrier of the Huntington disease gene. Before, 20, 30 years ago, in many cases they didn't even know it's genetic, so they didn't have a problem with it. But today, when you know what you're facing, it's a very big problem to go on with it and ignore what modern medicine is offering you. Okay, and I think I'll end with this.
Thank you for giving us some of the practical aspects of somebody who deals with the problem on a daily